You and your kid are just freeloaders. The words echoed off the dining room walls. My walls. The house I bought with my own sweat. Most people would cry or scream at their father. Not me. I looked at my 9-year-old son, smiled, and took a slow sip of wine. They had no idea I was about to destroy them. Monsters do not hide under the bed. They sit right at your dining table. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Ariana Warren. I am 34 years old, working as a senior data analyst at Apex Horizon Solutions. My entire professional life revolves around logic. I spend 60 hours a week hunting down anomalies, identifying toxic data trends, and building protective algorithms for massive corporate networks. I am trained to spot a bad investment from a mile away. Yet, somehow, the most catastrophic anomaly of my life was currently sitting in my own dining room, eating my food. The sharp metallic clink of a silver fork striking a porcelain plate pierced the heavy air. Outside, the freezing winter winds of Denver, Colorado, howled viciously against the double-pane glass windows, but the real frost was inside, settling right over the long mahogany dining table. You and your kid are just freeloaders. The words left my father Arthur's mouth so casually, dropping into the room like droplets of pure venom. A suffocating silence immediately followed. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table. A bizarre, cold, and numb sensation washed over my skin as my eyes slowly scanned the room. I looked at the rich oak floors I had paid to polish just 3 months ago. I looked at the modern crystal chandelier hanging above us, illuminating the perfectly roasted beef and garlic mashed potatoes. I had spent 2 long hours cooking immediately after finishing a grueling 10-hour shift at the office. I was sitting in the very house I had bled for, the house whose massive mortgage I paid on the first day of every single month without a single delay. And yet, right here in my own sanctuary, I was being called a parasite. I shifted my gaze to my mother, Beatrice. I waited for her to intervene. I waited for her to express even a fraction of maternal shock, or to at least tell her husband he had crossed a terrible line. Instead, she lifted her hand, took a slow, deliberate sip from her expensive wine glass, and nodded in silent agreement. Her face remained a mask of arrogant entitlement. Across from her sat my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was 26 years old, but she operated with the emotional depth and selfishness of a spoiled toddler. She did not even bother to look up from her lap. She was busy dragging a heavy crystal file across her freshly painted acrylic nails, a cruel smirk playing on her lips, without missing a beat. She sighed loudly and complained that the edges of the roast beef were a bit too tough for her liking. Arthur leaned back in his padded leather chair, puffing out his chest with an absurd sense of masculine pride. He felt the sudden need to justify his outrageous claim. He started boasting about his immense contribution to the household, loudly reminding everyone how he had personally fixed the broken water pipe in the guest bathroom just 2 weeks ago. He confidently declared that his hard physical labor made him the true provider and the rightful master of this property. My mind instantly flashed back to the disastrous reality of that pipe incident. He had taken a heavy wrench to a minor leak, completely ignoring my desperate requests to wait for a professional plumber. He forcefully twisted the wrong joint and ended up bursting the main water valve. Freezing water had flooded the entire hallway, ruining the new drywall and completely soaking an imported wool rug. I had to call an emergency plumbing service at 2 o'clock in the morning. Writing a massive check for $3,000 to fix his disaster was the true cost of his supposed hard labor. But in his delusional reality, turning a wrench and causing thousands of dollars in property damage somehow elevated him to the status of Lord of the Manor. I felt a familiar, dangerous heat rising rapidly in my chest. It was a primal, overwhelming urge to scream, to flip the heavy mahogany table upside down, to grab them by their designer collars and throw them all out into the freezing snow. But then, I looked to my right. My son, Leo, was sitting as still as a statue. He is 9 years old. His small hands gripped his fork tightly, his wide, innocent eyes darting nervously between his grandfather's aggressively red face and my frozen expression. He had barely touched his dinner. The toxic tension in the room was visibly suffocating him. My priority instantly shifted. The burning anger inside me morphed rapidly into a cold, impenetrable shield of absolute protection. I could not let my little boy absorb this familial poison. I turned my head to him, forcing my rigid facial muscles to soften into a gentle, reassuring smile. "Hey, sweetie," I said softly, keeping my tone perfectly steady and light. "You have eaten enough for tonight. Why do you not go upstairs to your room and boot up your console? You can have an extra hour of game time tonight." Leo looked incredibly relieved. He nodded quickly, slid off his tall chair, and scurried up the wooden stairs. I listened closely as his small footsteps faded away, waiting until the soft click of his bedroom door echoed through the ceiling. He was safe. The only piece of innocence had left the room. Now it was just the adults, the parasites and the host. Arthur crossed his thick arms over his chest, raising his chin, clearly anticipating a dramatic screaming match. He fed on chaos and emotional outbursts. He desperately wanted me to cry, to angrily defend myself, to engage in a pathetic debate over my own worth in my own home. Instead, I did the exact opposite. I did not raise my voice by a single decibel. I did not shed a single tear. I gently placed my silver fork down on the linen napkin, ensuring the metal did not make even a whisper of a sound against the table. I wiped the corners of my mouth slowly, folded my hands neatly together, and locked my eyes directly onto Arthur's. The dining room grew terrifyingly still. The slow burn of my rage crystallized into an absolute, unwavering, and lethal resolve. I held his arrogant gaze for 10 agonizing seconds, letting the silence crush the air out of the room. Then, I leaned forward slightly and spoke just one single sentence. "Your house fine." I pushed my chair back, the heavy wood scraping harshly against the floorboards, and stood up straight. I did not look back at my mother's suddenly confused face or my sister's paused nail filing. I simply turned around and walked out of the room, leaving them drowning in a heavy, terrifying silence. As I locked my bedroom door behind me, the heavy click of the deadbolt felt like a definitive period at the end of a long, miserable chapter. I did not collapse onto my bed. I did not bury my face in my hands. Instead, I stood by the frosted window, watching the snow fall, and let my mind trace the ugly, winding path that had led my family into my sanctuary. The invasion had not happened overnight. It was a slow, parasitic crawl that began exactly 10 months ago. Before they became the toxic fixtures in my dining room, my parents lived comfortably on the East Coast. They had a sprawling suburban home, a solid retirement fund, and a perfectly curated social image. But then came Chloe's grand delusion. My sister had convinced herself that she was destined to build a massive fashion startup empire in Los Angeles. Armed with zero business sense and an inflated ego, she needed capital. Arthur and Beatrice, blinded by their blatant favoritism, did the unthinkable. They liquidated everything. They sold the house, emptied their savings, and poured every single penny into Chloe's glamorous fantasy. Predictably, the so-called empire collapsed within 6 months. The money vanished into expensive leases, lavish launch parties, and terrible inventory. They lost it all. And so, on a freezing Tuesday night in late February, my doorbell rang at midnight. I opened the door to find the three of them shivering on my porch, surrounded by a mountain of expensive designer luggage. They had no cash, no backup plan, and nowhere else to go. Standing there in the snow, they played the roles of tragic victims flawlessly, blaming the economy, the market, and ungrateful business partners for their catastrophic failure. Looking at them, an old, deep scar throbbed in my chest. When I was 20 years old, terrified, pregnant with Leo, and desperately trying to finish my college degree. I had asked them for help. Their response had been cold and absolute. They told me I had ruined my life and cut me off entirely. I had to scrub cafeteria floors and work double shifts just to buy baby formula and pay tuition. I clawed my way up from nothing to become a senior data analyst. I bought this beautiful house in Denver entirely on my own. Yet, despite the bitter history of their abandonment, the stupid, soft part of my heart betrayed me. I looked at my shivering mother and my defeated father, and I opened the door. I told them they could stay in my fully renovated basement, just for a few weeks. They promised, just until they got back on their feet. That temporary stay quickly morphed into a hostile takeover. The boundaries dissolved within days. The basement was apparently too damp for Chloe's delicate skin, so she brazenly moved her massive wardrobe upstairs and completely hijacked my home office. My dual monitor setup and filing cabinets were shoved into a corner to make room for her makeup vanity and ring lights. Then, Beatrice started her silent erasure of my presence in my own home. I would come back from work to find my belongings missing. She casually threw away my hard-earned college diploma frame, replacing it with a generic landscape painting. She boxed up Leo's early childhood clay handprints because they supposedly cluttered the aesthetic of the living room. Meanwhile, Arthur crowned himself the undisputed patriarch of the household. He stopped asking and started demanding. He expected hot meals served on a strict schedule, commanded control of the thermostat, and treated my home like a hotel where he was the VIP guest. The financial toll was devastating. My monthly grocery bill skyrocketed from $400 to nearly $1,500. The utility costs tripled to keep the lights on and the pantry stocked with the premium organic brands they demanded. I was forced to take on massive amounts of overtime at Apex Horizon Solutions. I spent 60 to 70 hours a week staring at complex data models until my eyes burned. And what did they do while I worked myself to the bone? Nothing. They absolutely refused to find employment. Arthur claimed he was too old to start at the bottom. Beatrice said retail work was beneath her dignity. Chloe insisted she was a misunderstood executive waiting for her next big venture. Instead of working, they sat on my imported couches, using maxed-out credit cards to order luxury skincare and designer shoes they could not afford, letting the delivery boxes pile up by the front door. The tension had been building like a pressure cooker for months, but the true breaking point occurred just 2 days before that fateful dinner. I had come home early because of a severe migraine. As I walked upstairs, I heard loud, animated talking coming from Leo's bedroom. I pushed the door open and found Chloe sitting on my son's bed, aggressively holding his custom iPad. She was running a live stream, desperately trying to sell her leftover, cheap inventory to a handful of internet strangers. She had snatched the tablet right out of Leo's hands, telling him his educational games were stupid and that she needed the device for real business. I calmly walked over, ended the broadcast, and took the iPad out of her hands. I told her firmly that she was never to take my son's belongings again. Instantly, Chloe exploded. She did not apologize. Instead, she threw a massive, shrieking tantrum. She pointed her manicured finger at my face and screamed that I was a bitter, selfish monster. She wailed loudly so my parents could hear, accusing me of sabotaging her comeback and refusing to support my own blood. My mother rushed up the stairs, instantly wrapping her arms around a fake crying Chloe, shooting me a look of absolute disgust. That was the moment the last shred of my familial guilt evaporated. I realized then that they did not just view me as a safety net. They viewed me as a resource to be completely drained. And now, after Arthur had the absolute audacity to call me a freeloader in my own dining room, the puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. Their arrogance was not just born out of entitlement, it felt too solid. It felt like they knew something I did not. I walked over to my desk, booted up my personal laptop, and cracked my knuckles. The data analyst in me was fully awake. If they were hiding something, I was going to dig it up, rip it apart, and use it to destroy them. The blue light of my computer monitor cast a harsh, ghostly glow across my face. It was past midnight. While the rest of the house slept comfortably, wrapped in the heavy, expensive blankets I had paid for. I was wide awake. I did not shed a single tear over my father's cruel words at the dining table. Tears are a biological response to sudden emotional pain, but I was no longer in pain. I was in a state of hypervigilance. My professional instincts, honed by years of hunting down hidden corporate anomalies, were screaming at me. Arthur was an arrogant man. Yes, but he was also a coward at his core. He would never boldly declare himself the master of my property unless he secretly believed he had the ultimate upper hand. He was entirely too confident, too secure. I opened my web browser and began a systematic, ruthless sweep of my digital life. I logged into my primary checking and savings accounts. Everything appeared normal. The balances were exactly where they should be. I checked my retirement funds and college savings accounts for Leo, untouched, but the deeply unsettling feeling in my gut refused to subside. Hackers and financial fraudsters do not always attack the heavy front door. They slip quietly through the side windows. I navigated to my primary email account and clicked directly into the deleted items folder, and then the spam directory. I scrolled endlessly through hundreds of useless junk messages until a specific sender caught my eye. It was an automated notification from a major national bank, a bank I did not currently use for any of my finances. My breath caught sharply in my throat as I opened the first message. The subject line read, "Update on your second mortgage application." My hands started to tremble, just slightly. As I clicked the attached document, I stared at the screen, my mind struggling violently to process the impossible data before me. Someone had initiated a massive, high-interest loan against the equity of my home. I immediately opened a new secure tab and logged directly into a federal credit reporting bureau. I bypassed the security questions and pulled my comprehensive credit report. There it was, sitting like a venomous snake in the data, a hard inquiry from exactly 3 weeks ago, followed by a pending approval for a loan in the amount of $150,000. I dug deeper, accessing the digital copies of the application through the bank's online portal using a password reset trick connected to my intercepted email. The scanned documents loaded incredibly slowly. When the final signature page appeared, a cold wave of pure, paralyzing horror washed over me. At the bottom of the loan agreement was my signature, but it was not truly mine. It was a terrifyingly accurate forgery. I zoomed in on the digital ink. I studied the slight, unnatural curve on the first letter, the heavy, deliberate pressure on the tail end of my last name. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It belonged to my mother. Beatrice had sat in my home, likely at this very desk, and spent hours practicing my signature, perfecting it just enough to fool a tired loan officer. They had raided my locked filing cabinets while I was working 60-hour weeks. They had stolen my Social Security card, my tax returns, and the physical deed to my property. But why? Why did they need exactly $150,000 so urgently that they would commit federal banking fraud? I did not sleep a single second that night. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, I made myself a cup of black coffee. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the heavy snoring coming from the guest bedrooms upstairs. They were sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that I had found the ticking time bomb they had planted under my life. I stepped out into the freezing garage, locked myself inside my car, and made a highly confidential phone call. I dialed Marcus, a former corporate security colleague who now ran private intelligence contracts. "Marcus, I need someone who does not ask questions and works faster than the police," I told him quietly into the phone. I bypassed all the standard small talk and told him I needed a discreet, ruthless private investigator who could dig up buried financial dirt by the end of the day. Marcus gave me a name and a secure encrypted messaging link. Within an hour, I had wired a retainer fee of $5,000 to a ghost firm out of Chicago, along with Chloe's full name, her old Los Angeles address, and her Social Security number, which I had easily extracted from my parents' careless tax folders left on the kitchen island weeks ago. I went to the office and mechanically analyzed data sets, counting every single minute as I waited for the results. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my encrypted messaging app chimed loudly. a massive, heavily encrypted dossier dropped into my inbox. I locked my office door, pulled down the window blinds, and opened the file. What I read over the next hour shattered every single remaining illusion I had about the people sharing my blood. Chloe had not just failed at a legitimate fashion business, the entire startup was a complete and utter front. The private investigator had uncovered a massive digital trail proving that my sister had been actively participating in a highly sophisticated wire fraud syndicate. She had been acting as a money mule, funneling stolen funds through her fake business accounts for a highly dangerous, organized criminal network. But Chloe, being as greedy and profoundly stupid as she was arrogant, had skimmed cash right off the top. She stole from the syndicate to quietly fund her lavish Los Angeles lifestyle and buy her designer bags. The business did not collapse due to a bad economy. It was shut down because the criminals found out she was stealing from them. The $150,000 was not a desperate business loan. It was a ransom. The ruthless underworld creditors had tracked her down. They were threatening her life. They had given her a strict deadline to pay back the stolen funds, or they would make her disappear completely. The entire dark truth hit me like a speeding freight train. Arthur and Beatrice knew everything. They knew their precious golden child was a wanted criminal hiding from violent extortionists, and instead of forcing her to face the authorities, they decided to completely sacrifice me. They forged my signature to mortgage my home, fully intending to hand my hard-earned equity straight over to a criminal syndicate. They were willing to bankrupt me, destroy my flawless credit, and potentially expose me and my 9-year-old son to incredibly dangerous criminals, all to save Chloe from the absolute consequences of her own felonies. They were not just pathetic freeloaders eating my food and wearing out my patience. They were active, malicious predators. They had placed a massive target squarely on my back and intended to leave me holding the empty bag when the fraudulent mortgage defaulted and the criminals came knocking on my front door. The profound sense of betrayal I felt was instantly incinerated by a sudden, absolute lack of empathy. The vulnerability of the abandoned daughter vanished. The anxiety of the overworked mother completely evaporated. What replaced it was something terrifyingly calm and razor-sharp. The hurt was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of survival, using my home and my son's safety as the casino chips, I was going to show them exactly what happens when the house always wins. The next morning, I did not drive down to the local police precinct. Calling the regular authorities would have been a sloppy, emotional, and highly unpredictable move. It would have given my family the immediate opportunity to play the victim, to cry about a simple domestic misunderstanding, or worst of all, to panic and run away before the hammer truly fell. I did not want to merely scare them or start a messy family feud. I wanted to build a titanium cage around them. I wanted their own greed to be the heavy padlock. I took a sudden leave of absence from the office and drove across the city to a highly exclusive corporate law firm located in the financial district. I bypassed the standard family attorneys and sat down across a sprawling glass desk from a senior partner named Evelyn. She was a profoundly intimidating woman who specialized exclusively in high-stakes real estate litigation and complex white-collar financial crimes. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I slid the massive printed dossier from my private investigator, along with the digital copies of the forged mortgage documents, right across her desk. Evelyn read through the papers in absolute, chilling silence. When she finally looked up and met my eyes, she did not offer me an ounce of pity. She offered me a heavily sharpened legal weapon. We spent the next 4 solid hours drafting a devastating and irreversible maneuver. Instead of reporting the forgery right away, I legally established an irrevocable trust. I named my 9-year-old son as the sole and absolute beneficiary of this legal entity. With a few aggressive strokes of a pen, I legally transferred the complete ownership and title of my entire property directly into this newly formed trust. This was not just a clever shuffling of paperwork. An irrevocable trust is a fortress. It completely removes the asset from my personal estate forever. Legally speaking, I no longer owned the house. The trust owned it, and the trust was heavily protected by stringent federal regulations designed to safeguard the assets of minors. The sheer brilliance of this specific move was entirely calculated to maximize the damage. My father and mother were currently navigating the final approval stages of securing a $150,000 second mortgage using my forged signature. They were telling the bank that I was the sole legal owner of the collateral. But the very second Evelyn filed the new trust documents with the county clerk, my parents' fraudulent application instantly escalated from a standard case of identity theft to a massive, multi-count federal banking fraud. They were actively attempting to mortgage a property they did not own, using a fake signature against a legally protected trust entity. Federal prosecutors do not merely slap wrists for that level of audacity, they destroy lives. The legal trap was perfectly set. Now, I simply had to wait for them to walk blindly into the center of it. The official county processing required exactly 14 days to become absolutely ironclad. For 2 agonizingly long weeks, I walked back into my own house every evening and played the role of the broken, submissive, and pathetic daughter flawlessly. I swallowed every ounce of my pride and wore a thick mask of complete compliance. I forced myself to wake up at 5 o'clock every single morning just to brew their preferred brand of expensive artisan coffee. I scrubbed the kitchen counters they carelessly stained. I cooked elaborate, time-consuming dinners while Arthur continuously threw petty, degrading insults at my culinary skills, and Chloe loudly mocked my sensible corporate work clothes. They pushed me harder during those 14 days than they ever had before, testing the limits of my supposed weakness. I let them believe they had completely crushed my spirit. I apologized when they complained. I lowered my eyes when they yelled. Their massive, unchecked arrogance completely blinded them to the invisible, lethal net that was closing tightly around their throats. But a legal trap is only as good as the evidence holding it together. To ensure the cage was truly inescapable, I needed undeniable, high-definition proof of their premeditated criminal intentions. While the 3 of them were out of the house shopping for luxury goods with credit cards they could not pay off, I purchased 3 high-end, heavy-duty air purifiers. Hidden deep inside the sleek, modern plastic casings of each expensive unit was a microscopic, motion-activated security camera equipped with crystal-clear audio recording capabilities. I strategically placed 1 unit in the main living room, 1 in the kitchen, and 1 sitting right on the desk in Chloe's stolen home office. Every night, after I tucked Leo into bed, I would lock my bedroom door, pull out my laptop, and review the digital footage. It was an absolute goldmine of criminal conspiracy. I sat in the dark and watched high-definition video of my father and my sister sitting on my expensive couch, openly and gleefully discussing the exact timeline of the bank disbursement. I listened to the crystal-clear audio of Chloe laughing a sharp, cruel laugh as she planned to wire the massive sum directly to her underworld handlers the exact minute the stolen funds hit their fake account. I watched Arthur confidently brag to my mother about how incredibly easy it was to forge my name on the legal documents. He explicitly stated that I was far too stupid and entirely too busy working to ever notice the equity draining completely out of the property. I meticulously saved every single damning clip, uploading the files securely to 3 separate, highly encrypted cloud servers. The countdown finally reached 0. It was a crisp Thursday morning, the exact day the bank was scheduled to officially release the $150,000. The final mechanism of my trap was fully primed and ready to snap shut. While the 3 parasites slept heavily, recovering from their late-night wine binge, I moved quietly and purposefully through the house. I had already finished packing up the most vital, precious belongings that mattered to me and Leo: passports, birth certificates, irreplaceable family heirlooms, my professional hard drives, and his absolute favorite toys were already securely locked out of sight in the trunk of my car. I stood in the center of my immaculate kitchen, poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, and waited for the sun to rise on the day of their absolute, permanent destruction. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the 3 of them had finally dragged themselves out of bed and migrated down to the main living room. They were lounging on my imported couches, drinking the expensive artisan coffee I had supposedly brewed for them. I stood by the stone fireplace, my posture perfectly straight, holding a thick, crisp white envelope. I walked forward and handed it directly to Arthur. He did not even bother to sit up properly. He snatched it from my hand with a look of extreme annoyance and ripped the seal open. It was a formal, legally binding eviction notice. The document explicitly stated they had exactly 3 days to completely vacate the premises due to active criminal violations occurring on the property. Arthur read the bold black print. For a brief second, his eyes widened, but then his massive, unchecked arrogance completely swallowed his common sense. He threw his head back and let out a booming, theatrical laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. He aggressively tore the heavy legal paper right down the middle, then tore it again, throwing the shredded pieces directly at my feet. "You stupid, ungrateful girl," he sneered, his chest puffed out with that familiar, sickening patriarchal pride. "You cannot evict the rightful owner of the house. The bank just approved the final transfer for the $150,000 this morning. I have the capital now. I control the equity. In fact, since you want to play these pathetic little games, I am the one who is going to throw you and your little brat out onto the freezing street by the end of the week." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice by a single decibel. I simply picked up the sleek television remote from the glass coffee table, aimed it at the wall, and pressed a single button. The massive 75-inch screen instantly flickered to life. Instead of the morning news programs they usually watched, the screen displayed a crystal clear, high-definition video from just 2 days prior. The hidden camera inside the air purifier had captured the living room perfectly. The space suddenly echoed with the sharp, undeniable sound of Arthur's own voice. The digital audio was flawless. The entire room listened to the recorded Arthur openly bragging to Beatrice about how incredibly easy it was to forge my signature on the federal mortgage documents. Then came the chilling sound of Chloe's cruel, high-pitched laughter as she explicitly outlined her exact plan to wire the stolen equity directly to her criminal handlers the moment the funds cleared. The live Arthur stopped laughing. The arrogant, victorious smirk melted off his face so fast it was almost comical. His complexion shifted instantly from a flushed, angry red to a sickly, chalky white. Beside him, Beatrice gasped loudly. The expensive porcelain coffee cup slipped directly through her trembling fingers, crashing onto the hardwood floor and shattering into dozens of pieces, splashing dark liquid everywhere. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth as she stared in absolute horror at her own digitized image plotting a massive federal financial crime. Chloe reacted exactly like a wild, cornered animal, a primal, guttural shriek ripped from her throat. She lunged forward across the room, her manicured claws aimed directly at my face, screaming that I was a psychotic, spying monster. But in her blind, reckless, and uncoordinated fury, the heel of her designer slipper caught the thick edge of the wool rug. She crashed heavily and painfully onto the floor, knocking over a heavy side table and bruising her knees. Humiliated, completely unhinged, and desperate, she dragged herself up and grabbed her smartphone. She started screaming frantically at Beatrice to get behind her. She furiously tapped the screen, launching a live video broadcast to all her social media followers. Tears of pure, manipulative rage streamed down her heavily made-up face as she sobbed hysterically into the camera lens. She completely fabricated a wild, dramatic narrative, claiming I had violently attacked them, stolen all their money, and was illegally throwing my own sick, elderly parents out into the freezing winter snow. She begged the internet for help, hoping a massive mob of public outrage would magically force me to back down and delete the evidence. But she was far too profoundly stupid to realize what she had just done. I had already built an impenetrable legal shield around myself, but Chloe's chaotic internet stunt managed to trigger something far more immediate and terrifying than a lawsuit. In her desperate attempt to play the tragic victim, she had actively broadcasted her exact real-time location to the entire world. By 8 o'clock that evening, the heavy snowfall had stopped, leaving the suburban neighborhood completely silent and dark. But the peaceful silence was abruptly broken by the low, menacing hum of heavy, high-performance engines. Two massive, blacked-out sports utility vehicles rolled slowly, deliberately down our quiet residential street. They came to a complete stop, parking directly across from my front lawn. The shadowy figures inside the vehicles did not get out right away. They just sat there with the engines idling. Their heavy, bright headlights cut straight through the dark, illuminating my front door and the large living room windows. The glow of a lit cigarette could be seen from the driver's side window. The ruthless underworld creditors had seen Chloe's pathetic live stream. The digital beacon had been lit, and the wolves had finally tracked down their missing money. Total, paralyzing panic consumed the living room. The fake, manipulative tears on Chloe's face vanished completely, replaced by genuine, suffocating, primal terror. She crawled rapidly away from the front window, pressing her back against the wall, her whole body violently shaking. Arthur, the so-called strong patriarch who had boldly claimed ownership of my home just hours ago, was now cowering pathetically on the floor behind the sofa, absolutely paralyzed by fear. Beatrice fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She crawled toward the stairs, begging me to call the police, begging me to save them from the men outside, begging me to do something to fix the nightmare they had created. They were entirely trapped in the lethal web of their own lies. The hunters were at the door, and the forged mortgage money was safely frozen in the irrevocable trust, completely out of their reach. I looked down at the three of them, a pathetic, trembling mess of greed and cowardice. I offered them a polite, chilling smile. I did not say a single word. I simply turned my back on them, walked calmly up the wooden stairs, stepped into my bedroom, where Leo was safely playing games with his noise-canceling headphones on, and engaged the heavy steel deadbolt on the door. The terrifying standoff with the shadowy figures outside lasted until dawn, but the true reckoning arrived exactly at 8 o'clock on Friday morning. The quiet suburban street was abruptly flooded with a different kind of fleet. 6 massive black sports utility vehicles with flashing red and blue lights tore across my front lawn, accompanied by multiple local police cruisers. The heavy boots of federal agents stomped forcefully onto my porch. Evelyn, my brilliant attorney, had not just filed the trust paperwork. The very second the bank flagged the fraudulent mortgage application attempting to drain an irrevocable trust, it automatically triggered a mandatory federal investigation. The authorities had been watching, building their airtight case using the digital evidence I had securely forwarded to Evelyn. The front door was pushed open. Federal agents swarmed the living room. Arthur was forcefully yanked up from the floor. The cold steel handcuffs snapped sharply around his wrists. The commanding officer loudly read him his rights, charging him with multiple counts of federal bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. Across the room, Chloe shrieked as 2 agents pinned her arms behind her back. Her arrest warrant explicitly cited her deep involvement in the interstate wire fraud syndicate. The terrifying men in the dark vehicles outside had scattered at the first sound of police sirens, but Chloe was now locked in a cage far more inescapable. Beatrice completely collapsed. Her knees hit the hardwood floor, and she wailed in pure, agonizing despair. As the agents dragged her husband and her golden child toward the waiting vehicles, she scrambled frantically toward the open doorway. She reached out, tears streaming down her face, screaming my name, begging me to call my lawyer, begging me to save them. I stood firmly on the top step of the porch. I wrapped my arm tightly around Leo's small shoulders, shielding him from her frantic grasp. I looked down at the woman who had abandoned me at my lowest point, the woman who had tried to sacrifice my son's future. My voice was perfectly steady, entirely devoid of any mercy. Leo and I are just freeloaders. Mother, I stated clearly. We do not have any bail money. I pulled Leo inside and shut the heavy front door. Several months passed. Justice moved incredibly swiftly. Arthur and Chloe both faced lengthy sentences in federal prison, completely ruined by the undeniable video evidence. Beatrice was left entirely alone, stripped of all her assets and shunned by every single one of her wealthy former friends. She was forced to survive on meager social assistance, living miserably in a cheap, run-down motel. As for me, I sold the Denver house at a massive premium because the property was legally shielded within Leo's trust. The profits remained entirely untouched by my family's financial disaster. I used the funds to purchase a beautiful, sunlit villa nestled right on the edge of a serene lake, miles away from the city. Tonight, the only sound filling my living room is the soft crackle of burning wood. I am sitting comfortably, watching Leo laugh brightly as he roasts soft marshmallows over the glowing embers of our new fireplace. His eyes are full of absolute joy. Looking at him, I finally understand the absolute truth of survival. The most ruthless revenge in the world is not getting your hands dirty trying to destroy someone. It is simply stepping aside, letting their own blinding greed dig their graves, and walking away to live a brilliant, free, and fiercely beautiful life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.